The Tanya, it comes from a Hasidic dynasty. Hasidic dynasty in general, we hear the term Hasidism or Hasidus a lot, and a lot of us don't know what that is. Hasidus is not the same as Kabbalah. It's founded in Kabbalah, but it's different than Kabbalah. Kabbalah is the study of spiritual worlds. Chassidus is the study of God. That's what Chassidus is.
Wow.
So they follow similar frameworks because they're both studying things that we cannot necessarily put our hands on. But one, the goal is the spiritual framework of the world, and the other one is to God, a relationship with God. That's what Chassidus is. Where does Chassidus come from? Where was it born from? It was born from the Baal Shem Tov. He's the founder of Chassidus. He's a very famous name. There's multiple books on who he is. There's many, many miracle stories about him. Why? Some people ask, did he do so many miracle stories? Part of the idea is that if we saw a miracle, we would appreciate and understand God, and from the miraculous, we would be able to draw God into the mundane. I was reading, to quote Spirituality of Imperfection, and there's a quote there, and it comes straight from somewhere in AA, I want to say one of the grapevines, that, and this is not verbatim, that a miracle allows us to see the greatness and to appreciate that that is always there. In other words, miracles are happenstance situations, but that's something that always goes on in everyday nature. We just don't realize that. Miracles are just highlights of that. And that was the idea. If he would perform a miracle, people would say, oh, there's a God. And then they would spend their everyday to-day life relating to that God. And that was one of the ways he did it. There are those who oppose that greatly. They said that's not the way it's supposed to be done. If it was supposed to be done that way, then we'd all have miracles once a year or something like that. It can't be that you just do this.
Where did he live?
So he was born in Russia. He lived in a city that some people called one name, which I do not know off the top of my head. The other name that they gave the city was Akupi. The reason why the city was probably not called Akupi, because Akup means a ditch. So Akupi means the people that live in the ditch.
Right.
So that just means that he lived in a ditch in a city. But I don't remember the name of the actual other city. So he was born to a dirt poor family. His father and mother were known as people in the ditch that were the charitable people. So they used to have the other ditch people over for meals. That was who they were.
Berdichev?
No. Ditch, like a hole in the ground. It was said that his father was very welcoming and accepting of everybody. He never judged anybody for who they were. He just accepted everybody. And there was one Shabbos where they saw somebody who walked in on Shabbos. And in their community, they're a very close-knit community, so people came in from the outside. It means that they didn't keep Shabbos. And in essence, that meant that there was questions of where they came from. Why were they here? If you're not part of our community, what are you doing here? And everybody shunned this person. The only person that took them in was the Baal Shem Tov's father. And his father's name was Eliezer, and Eliezer brought him to his house. They used to have 20 guests over, or however many guests they had over, and the guests said, how could you have this person over, and then we can't go to your house? And he said, well, that's your choice. My choice is that my house is open to everybody. Your choice is whether you come or not. And he had this person over, and people trashed him, they trashed the person. And Shabbos went on like this. At the end of Shabbos, the person came to Eliezer and his wife Sarah, and they said, I am really Eliyahu Navi, Elijah the prophet, and because you have been so opening and welcoming, there's a gift that has to come to this world, and it's going to come through you. And that was his son, the Baal Shem Tov. Eliezer and Sarah both passed away very young. They both passed away by the time he was 5. And when his father was sick, I believe his father passed away second, his father called Yisrael, Baal Shem Tov, over to him. And he said, I want to tell you one thing. And this one thing is, in essence, the foundation of the entire Chassidus. The one thing he told him is that the only being that you should have any fear or awe of is God. And you should love all your fellow neighbors. You should love every single Jew. So that was the entire statement. And they passed away. Wow. And the Baal Shem Tov spent his life in this thought, and that's what his philosophy is based upon. And the Chassidus is based upon this philosophy. It's based upon the idea of building a relationship with God. If we have a relationship with God, then we'll understand that he's the only one we need to trust, rely upon, be in awe of. Fear is not a proper word, because it's not that we have to be scared God is going to strike us with lightning. But we have awe of our parents. We have awe of a coach. sometimes. So we have to build a relationship with God where we have awe of God. And then we have to realize that man doesn't run the world. Man being man or woman, but they don't run the world. There's no reason why I have to fear another human being. We have a relationship with God, and God is the one who, so to speak, sometimes we say that things that happen in life is to build that relationship with God. We've ended up in ruts because we tried to rely on our own means, be it our means or someone else's means. God is the one who strengthens, is the one who we're supposed to build that relationship with. And the more that weakens, the more we lose the spiritual part of our program, the more our program starts to slip and fall. The more it starts to slip and fall, the more issues we have. We can't beat this on a physical plane, we can beat it on a spiritual plane. And then the flip side is, though, we do have to do everything we can for another, not necessarily give, you don't have to be dependent upon them, codependent, or be enabling to other people, but we do have to be open to other people and care for them. Sometimes it's tough love, where I'm not going to help you, but I'm not going to help you because I love you. But we always have to be open to another person in an act of love. And there's stories from a very young age of him practicing this. He was put into an orphanage, and many times he would sneak out of the orphanage. Remember, if he was put in the orphanage in his community was on the ditch on the outside of town, so he was living in some other part of the ditch where the orphanage was, and he would sneak out into the forest. First time it happened, the air group went out to go look for him because he had eaten by a bear, and that's the end of you. And they couldn't find him. They presumed he was dead. A couple days passed, and then he came back. And slowly got used to this. So this kid, 5 years old, would just disappear, and he would come back. And one day he brought a group of kids with him. They wanted to go with him. And this group of kids went to the forest, and a bear came out. And when they were in the forest, a bear came out to them. The kids got very scared. And he turned to the kids and said, "Why are you scared? The only being that matters is God. And God will decide whether the bear's going to eat us or not." This is like a 5-year-old preaching. But he believed it, and that's who he was. And the bear didn't touch them. And the kids came back, and they told their parents, "That's an amazing thing happened. This bear came up, and we trusted in God, and it worked." And that was the last time they were allowed to talk to him anymore. It didn't work for the parents. But this is who he was. He met one time, and I don't want to go too much. I just want to give the history because I want to explain what the Tanya is. But he met one time in the forest. He found this guy who was studying. And that time, there was a lot of hidden tzaddikim. People that are righteous, but they're hidden about it. And there's reasons to be hidden about our righteousness. It's a nice way of being modest. A similar example today would be, do we give charity privately, because that's modest and secretive, or do you give it publicly? Mm-hmm. And obviously it sounds better to give it modestly. But in truth, there's an advantage to giving it publicly, because people see and they copy. Hey, look at them. They have money, and that's what they do with their money, give money. If I had money, and then one day, someone has money, they give money. They learn. There's education about that. But on the other hand, there's a greatness to modesty. So there were people that used to hide in the forest. They would have great spiritual depths, and they would come to cities and act as very simple people. And he found one person in the forest on one of his tours, and he went to the person, and he said, "You're going to take me. You're going to adopt me." And the person said, "I'm not adopting you." He said, "Well, if you don't adopt me, I'm going to go to the city and tell everybody who you are." And the person agreed. They said, "Fine, I'm going to take you." And they took him, and what happened was they took him from place to place for a little bit with them until they deposited him in the house that was like the central agency of all these people, so to speak. And that guy's name was Adam Baal Shem. That was the Adam Baal Shem. The Adam Baal Shem was the center of these hidden tzaddikim. And what they would do is they used to actually go around collecting alms, collect money, and they would save the money and redeem Jews that were thrown in prison for ransoms, for different, you didn't pay your rent, you get thrown in prison. How much get you out? 1,000 rubles. Okay, they would go collect 1,000 rubles and they would free this person. This is what they used to do, and they would all check in with the Adam Baal Shem, and he had like a checklist of who was in prison, and this was across different cities in Russia. He grew up in this house till he turned 13. When he turned 13, he was allowed to join this group. When he joined the group, he said, "This is the wrong way to do it." As soon as you join, you have your opinion. And he said that what we have to do is we have to supply Jews with jobs so that they could do this in each and every city. In other words, what are we doing? We're freeing people. A month goes by, they go back in jail. We're back in square when we do it again. It says we have to get people jobs. We have to make money. We have to create revenue. And what they would do is they would go around to these different cities and they created revenue. They would give people jobs. They'd say, "Hey, I bought this water shed over here. Why don't you come here? You'll take over the job. I don't want it anyways." And they would slowly but surely give people jobs, creating money, and creating in cities infrastructures of money that they could redeem their own. And once they were able to do this, it took 10 years. They were slowly able to plant seeds of actual financial sustenance in cities across Russia.
All in the ditch? No.
No, this is separate. What happened was after 10 years, so now he's 23, The next step was they started going to these cities and educating these Jewish people about Judaism, because since these people were so poor, they never had teachers. They're busy getting thrown in jail. So now at least they're not getting thrown in jail. They're living in the cities. They have a little bit of money coming in. Now they have to educate them. What they would do is they would move into a city. They would show up on the back bench of the shul. And they would say, what are you guys doing with your kids? And they said, kids? We don't have time for our kids. We have to go to work. Okay, I'll babysit your kids. And they would gather the kids around. And they would start teaching the kids. And the people were so happy there was babysitting. And not only babysitting, there was education going on. There was a structure. And then what they would say is the only thing you have to pay is an hour every evening that will teach you too. So you should know what your kids are learning. And they used to do this. And over the course of 9 months, they would quickly create a basic Jewish education. It was a crash course education across the city. And then they would disappear. 9 months later, they would live in the shul, so every morning they would get up. And that was where they were. And the people just, after a couple weeks, everything becomes normal. That's where the guy lives. I don't know what he does. I don't know how he eats. That's where he lives. And then 9 months later, they would come to the shul one day, and the kids would be looking for someone to be with them, and there was nobody there. And what would happen is once they felt the need for that, they would get together, they would pool money, and they would hire someone to come teach in the city. They would realize the need, and they would hire from Europe. Russia was much poorer than Europe, and this time it was 1698, so we're talking now 1715 or so. It was a poor time in Russia. They would hire teachers from Europe who had money, who were educated, and they would come in. And slowly but surely, this took another 10 years, cities in Russia started having education. And it was the rebuilding of education, which, at the end of the day, education is a very important fundamental of every person.
Was it religious?
It was religious education, yeah. It was based on Jewish identity and Jewish history and Jewish theology and reading Hebrew. They should be able to read the prayers. Now, he didn't do this whole second 10-year phase. He only did a couple of years of it. When he eventually got married during this process, and then he spent 10 years in private study. And during this whole time, he was a hidden righteous person. No one knew about his greatness. Even these people sitting in the back benches, no one thought that these people were some of the smartest people of the generation. They thought, this guy could read Hebrew and he doesn't know what to do with his time, so he's watching our kids. And it never crossed their minds these people knew the entire Talmud by heart. These people not only knew the entire Talmud by heart, they would have arguments on the most esoteric, finesse matters of Kabbalah, etc. They didn't. What do you mean? Why would you be sitting on the back bench of a shul if you knew that? Why would you talk to us? It just wouldn't work that way. In those times, it was very common that the intellectual would not mix with the simple. What do we have in common? We can't talk to each other. And that's why it was such a shock to them. But anyways, he spent 10 years in private study.
Wow.
At the end of the 10 years, so now he's 36, is when he came out and he revealed himself. Where was he? He was by the Carpathian Mountains. He revealed himself afterwards, and what he made for himself is where all these miracle stories come from. What he would do is he would have an open home. Anyone can come in, and he would talk some of the most simple ideas. Like, be in awe of God. You should not be in awe of anything except for God. Yiras Hashem. And he wouldn't go into deep concepts like, it says in the Bible, in this verse, based on this, and then you can look in Kabbalah, and then you can look in the Talmud, you can look here, and you can look back here. He would just say, be in awe of God. And he would tell stories.
But was he in Russia the whole time?
Yes. And he would tell stories. And his stories would be very, very, very simplistic concepts. You can read some of his works. They're all like a line long. And they're very, sometimes we wake up and we're in doubt, and we should have some awe of God. We should think about God. It was very, very plain things. And some people were very bothered by this. They said, you know how great you are. Why are you talking so simple? And his message is that it's as simple that counts. That was his message. At the end of the day, you can get as complex as you want, but if you miss the point is awe of God and love for another, and if you're going to get complex, you're going to miss the point, then there's no point. Right. Once a week, he would go very deep, and that was on Shabbos day lunch. He would have a closed meal, so not everyone was invited, and the reason was because if you would miss the purpose of the complexities, you shouldn't be there to hear it. And you'd have only his deepest followers, not deepest as the most devoted. Those are the most complex minds or intellectual followers. And they would come in and they would have their deep, deep conversations. And otherwise, everything else is very plain and very simple. He would tell stories. He would tell the stories of Avram and other things, and very, very, very down-to-earth things. When he passed away, his grandson took over. And his grandson led for a year. At the end of the year, on his yahrzeit, the day that the Baal Shem Tov passed away, his grandson announced at the Framing that I'm not supposed to be the next leader. He said, it's not for me. And he pointed to the Maggid, and he said, the Maggid is supposed to be the next leader. And the Maggid stepped up, And the Maggid changed a little bit of the philosophy of things. He increased the amount of students, and he increased the amount of publicity of teachings. In other words, until then, the Baal Shem Tov would say, don't write my teachings down. Because I don't want people to find out hidden secrets. I want them to know the message. A lot of times, for example, when people get into these complexities about things, and they miss the simple purpose of the message. And I'll give one reference of this that I've heard. I heard Open Talk, recorded Open Talk, obviously, from Bill W. on the day after the day of Dr. Bob passed away. And it says that he was coming here to say certain things. He says, I was coming here to say certain things. And Dr. Bob always told me, keep it simple. So I'm keeping it simple. And when you think about it, that's all it boils down to. I mean, the more complex we get in things, the more we miss the message. The more we miss the message, the more pointless it is. And not to get too far off topic, someone asked me, there's evidently, I don't know if this should go on recording, so I'm not really sure about this, but evidently there's Jews who throw rocks at the kosel. There's Jews who throw rocks at the kosel, at people, at either women that sing or women that come dressed inappropriately. I'm not really sure, I was not there, so I don't need to quote on it. People asked, how can you do that? And the answer is that they were so complex that they missed the simplicity. They were so caught up in complexities of Jewish law that they missed the simple verse in the Torah that says you can't lift a hand to another. And that's where complexities are bad. And that's where simplicity is good. There is a purpose to complexities also, but in their proper place, after we have the simple foundation. Simple foundation, the Baal Shem Tov wanted outlaid, was this awe of God and love for another, which was his foundation. So the Maggid expanded a little bit. He allowed people to write down messages. And one of the Baal Shem Tov's followers had a very strong complaint against him for this. He said, this is not right. And actually, at the time of this complaint, the Alter Rebbe was one of the students of the Maggid. And the Alter Rebbe heard the complaint and said, I want to tell you a story. So the story is that there was this king who had a son, and this king had a son, and this king had a son for generations, the way it worked. And there was a great stability there. This country grew on there was always a firstborn son. The firstborn son was the next king, and everyone followed the king. There was no politics. Everyone knew who the next leader was. And eventually there was a king one day who didn't have a son for a long time. And in his later years of life, he was blessed with a son. And the country was ecstatic because they weren't sure what they were going to do otherwise. You know, the second you don't have the simple chain of things, you have war, you have politics, you have everything. And then when the son was just a couple years old, he got very sick. And everyone was very concerned. They brought doctors, and doctors didn't know what to do until finally the son was on his deathbed. And one doctor came and he said that there's a cure to this, but the only mineral or the only thing that would help this son is a specific gem. And the only gem known to the world is sitting in the king's crown. He said, so we have to take the king's, in order to save the son, we'd have to take the king's crown, dismantle the crown, take out the gem, grind up the gem, put it in water, and then hope that the son, who's already, in some sort of cosmosis and in a coma of some form, will drink a drop of this. And the king said, without a doubt, of course it's worth it. And the Alter Rebbe turned to this person complaining about this new form of Hasidus from the Maggid, and he said, the same thing's true here. We're taking some of the most hidden, private parts in essence, like what's it our business to think about God? What's our business to talk about gods? It's private. What are we getting involved in? God. He said, because the point is that we need that. We're sick. We're sick in many ways. And we need a drop of a drop. And even if it hits us the wrong way, we start thinking about God, and then we're going to get turned off, and we're going to get twisted, and we're going to get in arguments about God, and we're going to say, you want to think about God? I hate God. That's what I'm going to think about God. And come up with some warped things about God. Maybe a drop will get in. And if that drop gets in, that could help us. That could save us. So therefore, it's all worth it, because just like the king has an only son, so too God has an only child, and that child is us. And it's worth it for him to take his most hidden, precious pearl and grind it up in the hopes that a drop will get into us. And this is, again, a part of the history. But why am I saying this? Because then the Maggid eventually passed away. And the Maggid had a bunch of followers. And the followers decided they weren't going to appoint a next leader. They were all going to be leaders in separate groups. So that's what they did. They all started their own groups. And as a group, they were going to sort of manage all these groups. And that's where you have the sects of Hasidus that we have today. You have Breslov, you have Berdichev, you have Skver, you have Skulin, you have Chabad, you have, there's so many. Today there's hundreds, but It came from these different groups. And all the groups...
Each from a different place?
Eventually each from a different place, but from followers of this Maggid, and then their followers. But the way they always taught it was they kept the teachings private and the message simple. In other words, the simplicity is, you pray as I pray. Why? Let's not get into the why. For example, you'll see certain people, they dress as their Hasidic master dresses. Maybe you'll see in one place in Borough Park people wearing white socks with black pants, and you're saying, what's wrong with those people? I don't know, get dressed in the morning. And some people wear like the fur hats, and some people wear this hat, and some people wear this type of coat, and some people wear that. What they're doing is, because they're copying whatever the Hasidic master did, and they're not asking why, because they say it's not for us. What we know is that for whatever reason, this helps us connect to God. There's a story that a Chassid Nachabad, a Hasidic master who was lighting a menorah, and as he was lighting the menorah, there was a broom in front of the menorah before the window. And he went to move the broom. He didn't want the broom to be right next to the menorah. He's like, he wants a beautiful setting. He didn't want that. And then he realized that some of his students are going to think that part of the service of lighting the menorah is you have to make sure there's a broom there, and then you'll move the broom. So as he stops, he says, this is not part of the service. This is not something that we copy. And then he moves the broom. And the next night, there were those followers that put a broom there, and when they went to move it, they said, and this is not part of the service. This is because they don't know the meaning behind things. There's a positivity to this. There's a positivity to this, but there's also a negativity to this. Positivity is that they don't get confused by things. They know what they're supposed to be doing. Negativity is they don't know why or how, and we also need to know this. Chabad, starting with the Alter Rabbi, was different. He wrote a book of why and how. What is that book? That book is the Tanya. When he started writing this,
The Alter Rabbi?
when he started writing this, he got a lot of challenge, a lot of adversity from his peers. He said, this is not the way we do it. We don't give the inner messages. We only give the main message. And he said, yeah, but now we need to. People also need to be able to study why and how. What the Tanya will go into is the soul. What is the soul? The characteristics of the soul. How does the soul work? And why that soul works that way. How does that relate to us? There are things that come from our soul into our being. And the question is how that comes that way, why that comes that way, where that comes from. In psychiatry, they'll tell us that every message we have comes from somewhere. If we have a fear of dark, it came from somewhere. It wasn't just born a fear of dark. If we have a fear of cockroaches, it comes from somewhere. There's something in our past that led to that. If we have anger, the anger comes from somewhere. Mm-hmm. In Chassidus, in the Alter Rabbi's Chassidus, and probably in all Chassiduses, we also believe this. Everything comes from somewhere. But some of the things come from our soul makeup. And if we understand our soul, hopefully we can understand where they're coming from. We say, like in the fourth step, we're trying to identify where these things are coming from to be able to address them. Lahavdil, in other words, not the exact same, but comparatively. With our soul, we also understand where things are coming from. Where's the energy for anger coming from? Because we understand that, maybe we could redirect that energy. What is our positive thinking? Do we have a godly thinking? Do we have godly emotions? Where do they come from? And how does our soul work and connect to us? And that was his purpose and goal. With it, he said that one should not study a Tanya just by reading it. Because he said, again, it's a complex thing. They should study in groups, and they should study with people. And they should talk about it, and it should be a group activity. So that's the intro.